Hi, I'm Micah Halpern. Thank you for joining me today as I do some thinking out loud. Our first segment is called Background Briefing. The first thing I've been thinking about is disproportionate and proportionate responses. Two words, disproportionate response. That is a term being hurled at Israel by her detractors when describing Israel's response to the attacks against Israel's border with Gaza. To state the obvious, Gaza is controlled by Hamas. Gaza is not Israel. The now infamous fence, the boundary that separates Israel and Gaza, is known in military jargon and international diplomacy as a hot border. It's hot because the parties on both sides are at war, because there are regular attempts to breach the border, and because there are actual attacks on one side against the other at the border. The reality, Hamas has sworn to destroy Israel. Hamas leadership organizes the riots and choreographed the attacks on the border fence. Those actions are considered to be an act of war, and Israel, in defense, responded. The dilemma Israel faced was figuring out how to prevent their border from being breached by Hamas, while also preventing as many deaths as possible of innocent participants in the riots come protests along the borders. Interrogations of those Hamas fighters who successfully crossed into Israel, only to be subsequently apprehended, revealed confessions admitting that their mission was the part of the grand Hamas plan to cause as much harm as possible once inside Israel. Riots are weapons of the attack for Hamas. They are not peaceful demonstrations. Compare, let's say, for instance, the funeral processions of those who died during the border riots with the actual actions taken during the riots, and the distinction becomes glaring. The funerals were massive, with thousands in attendance, but they were not a threat. There was hate speech, but no violence. There was fury and grief, but no attacks against Israel. So, was Israel's response proportionate? International law allows a country to defend itself. The law permits Israel to fight back against those attacking her border. The question is how? How strong can they strike, and against whom? International law stipulates that certain criteria be in place. There needs to be a military objective. One needs to strike only at the threat, and the threat should not be indiscriminate. The selection of weapons and tactics to be used in confronting the enemy must take into account the best way to avoid as many civilian casualties and collateral damage as possible. International law also permits a country to attack the enemy in a manner that addresses the threat so that it does not arise again. Some of the criteria are cut and dry. Others are more vague, allowing for latitude and therefore open to interpretation. If Israel applied these guidelines, then their actions at the border with Gaza were within the rubric of proportionate response as permitted by international law. Israel dropped flyers into Gaza beseeching local Palestinians not to attend the protests. The flyers explained that innocent civilians were being used as tools by Hamas, and that Hamas was putting their lives in danger. The message was simple: do not approach the fence. Loudspeakers warned Palestinians to stay away from the fence. Israel employed sharpshooters to attack known and recognized Hamas and Islamic Jihad commanders within the crowd. The major critique against Israel is the military's decision to use live ammunition rather than water cannons or rubber bullets. The answer is straightforward and simple: precision and range. Water cannons can only be effective when used within a few dozen yards of the target, and rubber bullets lose accuracy after 100 yards and are out of control at 200 yards. A rubber bullet is normally round, not rocket-shaped, and much lighter than the regular round. It's not aerodynamic and should only be used when needed for relatively close-range engagements. As has been noted in court decisions of many cases adjudicated on this very matter, and this is critical to our understanding of what happened, the death of innocent civilians is not, in and of itself, a violation of international law. 62 were killed in one day at the border. Hamas claimed 50 of the dead as their active members. Islamic Jihad has taken credit for another 3. That leaves 8 or 9 unclaimed, aka innocent civilians. Casualties. Given the mayhem, the swarming crowds, the rapid movements of the organizers and the people, the billowing smoke of burning tires, it's astounding that many more Palestinians were not killed or wounded. And that is a true testament to Israel's accuracy and proportionate response. The words proportionate and disproportionate are not literary terms. They do not mean equal or nearly equal. It doesn't mean that if the Palestinians throw stones at Israel, Israel needs to throw stones back at the Palestinians, or Molotov cocktails, or pistol fire. It means that they must have a clear set of objectives and be responsible and moral in the choice of action used in defense against the threat. Israel acted properly. Israel acted proportionately. On another subject, this time the Palestinian leadership, now that Palestinian President Mahmoud Abbas is out of the hospital, he is hard at work conducting a serious Palestinian media blitz. The Palestinian president wants to assure, and many would say convince, Palestinians that he is 100% fine and functional, and that the Palestinian political leadership is stable. In other words, now is the time to worry. Palestinians should worry, the Arab world should worry, Israel should worry, the West should worry, and worry, seriously worry. Some facts are undeniable. Abbas was elected president in 2005 by 62% of the vote. It was an overwhelming majority, and that was the first and last time he ran for election. There was a parliamentary election in which Hamas won enough seats to confer a prime minister position. President Abbas was so dissatisfied with the result that Abbas quickly disavowed the Hamas prime minister, and then he appointed his own prime minister, which led in turn to a bloody, violent Hamas coup in Gaza, which then ultimately ousted Fatah and the PLO. Hamas became the ruling power in Gaza. Aziz Dweik, the current speaker of the Palestinian Legislative Council, wears two hats. He is also Hamas representative. According to what we know about Palestinian law, the Speaker of the PLC is in line to succeed the president in case of an unforeseen circumstance. But given the state of conflict between Abbas and Hamas, it is unlikely that Abbas or his cronies would ever willingly permit Hamas or any Hamas member to slip into the position of president. What passes for government in both the West Bank, Ramallah, and Gaza is more accurately a kleptocracy, which by definition is a government run by those who seek status and personal gain at the expense of those who they govern. The governments are rife with cronyism and nepotism. It is who you know and how much you own, and those in charge are owning more and more and becoming richer and richer. And that's only part of the problem, only part of the reason we should be worrying. The actual problem in both the Palestinian governments, both in Gaza and the West Bank and Ramallah, is that in greater Palestinian society, there is a synapse on the issue of democracy. They were told that they were voting in a democratic election. But Palestinians were never taught about democracy. They were plunged into a pseudo-democracy and have never been sensitized to the basic democratic culture. They know how to vote. That's a given, and it's important. But the real essence of democracy is not feeling or freely voting one's conscience. Casting a ballot for a candidate or a party is not enough. Elections are the easiest part of democracy. They take little effort and are immediately quantifiable. The entire exercise is deceptive. The real essence in understanding and appreciation and adherence to democracy is the values of democracy, like freedom, not just physical freedom, but intellectual freedom, freedom of speech, of press, to assemble, the protections like equal protection under the law, fair and just courts, protection from abusive leadership and police, protecting minority rights, and about equality and respect for human life. Without first teaching about the importance of these rights and the necessity of preserving these values, democratic elections are nothing more than a farce. What takes time is building democratic institutions and learning about why they are so important. School curricula needs to focus on teaching equal respect for one another and for those who are different. It's too late for today's Palestinian adults, but the children can still be taught. And if they are, then a new generation will emerge, one with a healthy respect for democracy and for freedom. But given present Palestinian leadership and those who we know are contending for positions, that possibility seems very unlikely. So we worry. It's too easy to blame Israel for the problems of the Palestinians. Internally, neither the Palestinian Authority nor Hamas have any real democratic infrastructure and no plan to build one. Abbas holds the political system together only by virtue of being the successor to Arafat, and by any challenge to Abbas, even if successful, and if duly elected, would not and cannot result in the Palestinian democracy until true democratic institutions, values, and traditions are introduced and inculcated into their daily life. The future of a healthy Palestinian state is not possible. They say, don't worry, be happy. If only it were that simple. Coming up next, points of view. Here's what some important voices have been talking about. First up, from the New York Post, written by Sander Gerber, who was the CEO of Hudson Bay Capital Management, and by IDF Brigadier General Reserve Yossi Kuperwasser, who was director of the Jerusalem Center's Project on Regional Middle East Developments. Gerber is an activist philanthropist who was the powerful force behind the Taylor Force Act. The column is entitled, "The U.S. Must Hold Palestinians Responsible for Terror." It was published on June 7th, 2018. This is how the piece begins. The long overdue passage of the Taylor Force Act addresses a well-known fact about the Palestinian Authority that has been overlooked by policymakers and underreported by international media for decades. The PA is a terror-sponsoring entity. The pay-to-slay policy is backed by the force of law and specific budgetary allocations. The authors describe the crazy status of the PA paying terrorists and their families. They continue. A 5-year prison sentence for men convicted of terrorism-related charges in Israeli courts and a 2-year sentence for women earn a lifetime annuity. Right now, there are 6,500 such prisoners. How does the Taylor Force Act make the PA accountable and end this travesty? The law sets down very specific, transparent markers to ensure that the PA complies before it can receive U.S. taxpayer funds. This is necessary because the PA has a habit of making superficial changes that leaves its pay-to-slay system intact. For example, in 2014, Palestinian Media Watch noted that when pressure was brought on the PA to stop paying terrorists, it shut down the PA Ministry of Prisoner Affairs. But then it announced that it had created a new PLO Commission of Prisoner Affairs. The head of the PLO Commission was Issa Karaki, who had been the PA's Minister of Prisoner Affairs, and the ultimate authority for the new commission lay with PA President Mahmoud Abbas. With the name change, Abbas could claim that the PA was no longer paying terrorists, while the mechanism for doing so didn't change at all. The column concludes by asking important questions about the PA and its intentions. They write the following. The idea that the PA is committed to peace and nonviolence, even as it incentivizes terror, is one of the contradictions that explains why 25 years after the signing of the Oslo Accords, there is still no final Israeli-Palestinian peace. If the Taylor Force Act compels the Palestinians to change their behavior in a verifiable fashion, it might be the first step towards real accountability, the lack of which provides little incentive for PA leaders to change the status quo or negotiate in good faith. Second up is a column from the New York Times, and it is by Bret Stephens. He writes this from Hamburg, Germany. It was published June 8th, 2018. It is entitled, "Tell Them I Was Not Afraid." It is his personal family story and very compelling. Stephens begins. For years, Raya Mazen's slim memoir sat on my shelf unread. The sort of book familial duty prevents you from throwing out and emotional dread keeps you from reading. Raya's life had been an uneventful one. It began in 1919 in the Latvian port of Liepāja, also known as Libau, and ended in Israel nearly 96 years later. In between came the Holocaust. On Tuesday, I finally took the book down and read it in one sitting. I had a reason. Alexander Goland, a member of the Bundestag and co-leader of Alternative for Germany, AfD, this country's third largest political party, had said in a weekend speech that Hitler and the Nazis are just a speck of bird, expletive, in over 1,000 years of successful German history. I needed to learn anew just what that speck had meant for my extended family. Stephens continues to describe poignantly events of the murder at the hands of the Nazis. What about Raya? She and Grisha had barely escaped Riga under heavy German fire. They wound up in Samarkand, in what is now Uzbekistan, where he enlisted in the Red Army and was badly wounded in action. In 1945, they were reunited in Riga, and Raya set about discovering what had happened to her family. one of a handful of Jewish survivors from Papaya, out of the original population of 6,500, had known Raya's mother and had tried to help her. I brought your mother a work certificate attesting that she was working and did not need to go with the rest, the survivor told Raya. I begged her to take the paper, but she told me, I will not take it. My husband is already gone, my sister Becca is terrified, and we will go together. Just know that I am not afraid. She added this, if you meet any of my children, tell them I was not afraid. Tell them to continue living knowing that I was not afraid. In 1972, Raya emigrated to Israel, which is where I came to know her. She had taken her mother's words to heart and had the steady gaze of a woman who feared nothing because she had seen the worst. Stevens is making a point. Beware of those who trivialize the Holocaust, those who trivialize it anywhere and everywhere. That is the case all over the world, not just in Germany. Coming up, commentary through cartoons where pictures tell the story. Let's discuss a very sad yet funny cartoon by Yaakov Kirshen, published June 3rd, 2018. The famous author Michael Chabon is at Hebrew Union College, and he's pouring Kool-Aid to American Jews. Chabon spoke at HUC commencement. HUC is Reform Judaism's rabbinical school. He said endogamy, which is Jewish in-marriage, is racist. Chabon asserted that Jews marrying Jews sets up a ghetto. Obviously, Dry Bones fervently disagrees. The Kool-Aid jug has a Star of David with an equal sign than a swastika. And then it reads, Zionism is racism. Next up is a cartoon called The Grim Reaper of the Middle East by Stefan Perret of Thailand, published May 15, 2018. The subject is the U.S. opening their embassy in Jerusalem. The Reaper has a sign on the scythe, his weapon. The sign reads U.S. Embassy in Hebrew, Arabic, and English, and is dripping with blood. Next up is a cartoon called Animals. It was published May 15, 2018 by Nate Beeler in the Columbus Dispatch, which is in Ohio. It has three characters, a Hamas terrorist, an MS-13 gang member, and what looks to be a regular person. On top of each, there is a caption. Atop the Hamas terrorist, it reads, peaceful protester. Atop the MS-13 person, it reads, human being deserving of infinite dignity. And atop the third, whose body is decorated with the words resist and impeach Trump, it reads, journalist. Funny. In a moment, more of my own perspective and a few predictions. Kenya is asking Sudan for permission to fly their commercial airliners over their airspace en route to Israel. Sudan and Israel do not have diplomatic relations, but one of the documents included in a trove of documents leaked by WikiLeaks provided a telegram from a senior advisor to the president of Sudan to a U.S. senior official. The telegram reads, if things are going well with the U.S., you might be able to help us with Israel, as they are your closest ally in the region. The plan is to start with one flight a week. This is a very big step forward in terms of African-European business. Israel can easily be a hopping point en route for travelers and for goods. Argentina canceled their friendly soccer match with Israel. It was scheduled to take place on Saturday, June 9th in Jerusalem at Teddy Stadium at 3:30 p.m. Israel time. It is clear that the BDS movement was able to successfully influence Argentina to scratch the match. The Israeli branch of Soccer Association asked FIFA, the World Soccer Association, to ban Argentina from the World Cup in Russia. Israel claimed that Argentina's cancellation of the match was a case of religious discrimination. Comtech, the Israeli company that organized the game, has already paid Argentina and their soccer association $2 million for the sale of tickets. The game sold out in 20 minutes after going on sale. Discrimination is against FIFA rules, and yet Argentina was permitted to compete in the World Cup. Louis Farrakhan delivered a speech recently in which he attacked Jews and Judaism. It was a speech which was a lot like a medieval canard against Jews. The founder of the Nation of Islam said, satanic Jews who have infected the world with poison and deceit. He continued, the false Jew will lead you to filth and indecency. That's who runs show business, that's who runs record industry, that's who runs television. Farrakhan alleged that Jews often forced aspiring actors to submit to despicable acts. He shouted, "Do you know that many of us who go to Hollywood seeking a chance have to submit to all kinds of debauchery? They give you a little part. It's called the casting couch." See, that's Jewish power. It's hard to imagine that in 2018, people like this still exist and speak out publicly. More amazing is that so many people actually believe these lies. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu went on a European trip to convince leaders there to join Israel's point of view. One of Netanyahu's talking points is his assertion that Israel continues to help Europe through sharing intelligence. Netanyahu said, "Israel is operating against the threat of radical Islam. We prevent awful terror attacks, also in France. Israel has thwarted many terror attacks across Europe and will continue to do so. This is an essential point. Israel is doing its job to help protect Europe. Now Israel wants a quid pro quo. Netanyahu is asking Europe to join forces with Israel and the US. Trust me on this, it's true. As a result of the nuclear deal, Iran was expecting huge increases in tourism, amounting to about 3 to 4% of their annual income. Iranians were planning on their tourism expanding every year. Next year, they were planning on it being 6 to 8% of the GNP. The problem is that the new US sanctions are discouraging Iran's potential tourists. But there are tourists still coming. There are curious tourists interested in visiting Iran and reporting back to their friends and relatives about their experiences. Most of these tourists are thrill seekers, and there are plenty of these thrill-seeking tourists. The first of Iran's visitors are tourism writers and photographers. They're there to document the pristine adventures of uncharted escapes and trails. These are tourists who blaze the trails for mainstream conservative tourists afterwards. What was supposed to be a real economic find for Iran has just found the rug pulled out from underneath it. It's a cardinal rule. The winner of the Eurovision International Song Festival hosts the next year's competition. This year, Israel won, and next year Eurovision will be held in Jerusalem. But it's not that simple. Politics have set in, and the situation is getting ugly. Iceland, Sweden, Turkey, and Ireland have announced that they will not attend next year's competition in Jerusalem. They have chosen to boycott a cultural event whose very purpose, much like international sports and the Olympics, is to bring different people from different countries together. Knowledge and interaction promote dialogue and remove biases and hatred. Some nations, like some people, just can't get beyond the biases, and that's a shame. We've been thinking out loud about a lot today. Now that you know what I've been thinking, let me know what you're thinking. Email me at micah@jbstv.org. Tweet me at Micah Halpern. Tell me what you think. Before we end, let me leave you with one piquante piece of information. You may have noticed that I'm wearing a beard. I used to tout the beard all the time, but then I was told that it had become white, and it aged me, so I immediately shaved. It has returned, not for style, but for personal reasons. It's a shloshim beard, a beard grown during the first and second periods of Jewish mourning. My mother died recently, and so I do not shave. It's an ancient Jewish custom. Jewish mourning is filled with traditions and customs. We rip our clothes. We don't cut them, we rip them. They should be ripped because we're ripped. We attend a levaya, which is translated often as funeral, but it's not. Levaya actually means to escort and to accompany. Funeral is derived from the Latin, which means to put into the ground. We escort our loved ones and friends. We give the deceased great respect in death. We even ask forgiveness and hope that they can put in a good word for us. The family sits Shiva 7 days in house. People come and talk to you. We laugh, we cry. At Shiva, we connect. After Shiva, there's a month, a shloshim, 30 days of mourning, where one does not shave or cut hair. Then there's an entire year, the Shana. During that period, traditionally one abstains from live entertainment, music, parties, plays, even simchas. One says Kaddish, the mourner's prayer, for 11 months of the year. During the entire period, a mourner is greeted with the Hebrew expression, Hamakom yenachem etchem b'toch shar avlei Tzion v'Yerushalayim. May you be comforted with the mourners of Jerusalem and Zion. It is said in the plural and connects you to Jerusalem. Israel weeps for Jerusalem. Makom actually means place, but it is a synonym for God. During the time of the temple, Jews made pilgrimage there 3 times a year, on the 3 holidays, Passover, Sukkot, and Shavuot. There was an up and down staircase in the temple itself. When you went up and down the staircase, that's how you approached the temple. You offered your sacrifice, but when you were in your year of mourning, you went up the down staircase, and everyone greeted you saying, Hamakom Yenachem Etchem B'toch Shar Tzion Avlei Tzion V'Yerushalayim. Those descending had just come from the holiest place that represented God. And so they said, Hamakom, the place, will have compassion. My mother was 90 years old, nearly 91. She lived independently in a multi-storied home, that home where she raised us, her 3 children. She lived there without assistance. She still drove. She drove very well until the last days of her life, when she was hospitalized to tweak, actually, her meds. Then she took a nosedive and went fast. My mother was a volunteer, a leader. She was an organizational force behind nearly every community activity and event. May her memory, Malka Bas Mordechai V'Chana, be a blessing. Thank you for thinking out loud with me, Micah Halpern. Let's think out loud again next week on JBS.
We would be pleased to send a complimentary DVD of this program to anyone who wishes to support JBS with a tax-deductible gift of $36, double high or more. Simply visit the JBS website at jbstv.org and click on the Donate button to make a donation by PayPal or your credit card. And please indicate the program for which you would like a DVD. Or you can send your tax-deductible check to JBS, P.O. Box 180, Riverdale Station, Bronx, New York, 10471. And again, please remember to indicate which program you would like to receive with our compliments. And we thank you for your kind support.